Yeah, so I think when we think about what's new about a company like Deliveroo, I think there's always a risk that we can overstate the newness. And I think what is new about Deliveroo or say Uber is the use of these technological platforms to organise the distribution of work, how work is managed, and how people relate to each other. So, the actual work of Deliveroo is not new. Delivering food is, a well-worn practice. But what's new about it is finding a new way to organise that distribution of food over an online platform, particularly as mediated with an app as well. So I think one of the biggest challenges with organising delivery riders is, say if we compare to a call centre, where people come into the same workplace, they have their breaks at the same time, they share a space together. The challenge with Deliveroo is that's not necessarily the case. In London, for example, all the delivery riders in London are across London. They're in a similar space, but they don't share a workplace. So, they might not meet other riders, they might not make those connections. But I think what's particularly interesting about Deliveroo as opposed to Uber is the meeting points set by the company. In their eyes, to make it quicker for you to get to the delivery, the restaurant and pick up and then deliver. But that provided the opportunity for riders to come together, to swap numbers, to start WhatsApp groups, is that despite those challenges of geography essentially, people were still able to form those networks, those kind of embryonic forms of organisation that later the IWGB and other unions were able to build on top of. So the strikes in the summer in London, they came about because Deliveroo decided to try and move from an hourly pay with payment per drop onto an entirely per drop basis. Now this was happening at the same time as Amazon food delivery and Uber food delivery was starting up. And I think most people recognise this was an attempt to shift all of the risk onto drivers. If there's no demand that afternoon or that day, people won't get paid. And the way that they chose to talk to workers about this was just to send them a text. We're dropping the hourly rate. And I think the ability for people to come together was because of these meeting points they'd had, because there were WhatsApp groups that people had already formed those connections and that community amongst themselves, is they were able to respond very, very quickly by saying, we're not happy with this, and we're going to go to the headquarters of Deliveroo, and we're going to protest about it. Now, I'd been doing a little bit of work before the strike happened, and we'd been doing some organising with the IWGB, and there was a real sense of people were interested in getting involved in the union, which in most casual workplaces, it's quite an argument to get involved with the union, let alone a kind of a radical trade union. And so it was clear that the basis for that was there before Deliveroo tried to make the change. And we went to Deliveroo headquarters not knowing how many people would turn up. And on the first day there were 300-400 people. It really had this kind of spontaneous explosion of people saying, we don't want to be treated like this and we won't take it. What was interesting is the creativity involved in it. So people did ride-arounds London together, went to the restaurants, told them what was happening, got them to turn off the Deliveroo app. They've got real solidarity in terms of, both in the traditional media, social media, and also doing things like crowdsourcing strike funds. We saw a real kind of outpouring of creative forms of organising, which, shows us that in these casual sectors, it's not that they're not able to organise, they are able to organise, and they're able to organise in new ways that show us what trade unionism means today. So I think the role of social media is important, but I think we have to be careful about how we consider it. So in a sense, because the work is already organised on an online platform, people are, expect to use that kind of technology more regularly. So if you're receiving orders on a smartphone, you're receiving management, your relationship with management is through the smartphone, it makes sense that people will think about how they relate to other workers through that. So if you meet a fellow delivery driver, you swap numbers, you join the WhatsApp group. And this started, I think, in London just as a way to kind of build a community. There are lots of, particularly with the moped drivers, lots of recent migrants who keep in touch with each other on WhatsApp anyway, share information, introduce each other to jobs and so on. Similarly with the kind of the bicycle communities, keeping in touch with each other, letting each other know about what's happening in London and so on. And these kind of networks form the basis for the organising that came after. You have to be in touch with people to be able to collectively organise. There are limitations to it. WhatsApp groups have a maximum number of people that can be in them. They're not always the best medium for having debates about strategy. Often it's much more about sharing bits of information. And so there's a problem with longevity. How do you organise more long-term with social media? And I think, what has been clear from going to the Deliveroo meetings in London is that it's not a question of offline or online, but about having a relationship between the two. So still having those physical meetings, still having those physical protests, but finding the best ways to utilise social media to encourage that. So Deliveroo workers, and I'm going to use workers deliberately here, like workers who drive cabs for Uber, at the moment are employed under what's called self-employed independent contractor status. Now in essence for Deliveroo this means that they don't have a traditional employment relationship. So Deliveroo don't have to pay them holiday pay, sick pay, they don't have to meet minimum wage. And technically, if you're a Deliveroo rider, you can get somebody else to do your job for you, you can contract it out. Now in reality this isn't the case. You have to pay a deposit for your uniform, you have to turn up at certain shifts, you have a relationship with Deliveroo, not with a network of restaurants. And this is the kind of contractual trick that the gig economy has been built on. So rather than taking all of these workers in-house, paying them properly, looking after their employment rights, it outsources them and cuts the labour costs for the company. And there are a couple of reasons to do this. Firstly, it's cheaper for Deliveroo. Secondly, if you're looking for venture capital investment, you don't want to have 8, 10, 12,000 workers on your books because that entails costs and looks more risky. So if you can make it look like your company only employs some marketing, some software developers, and goes and gets labour from this gig economy, it makes it look like you're a worthwhile investment to venture capital. And these companies are pumped up with venture capital. Just before the strike last year in London, Deliveroo received £230 million in investment. And so it's clear that the money is there to pay people properly, they're just choosing not to. And I think, importantly, if Deliveroo talk about whether or not they can afford to pay this, they take a third of every order price and they charge delivery on top. Now, we have to ask, where's that money going? Because it's not going to delivery drivers. They're being paid a very, very small amount. And it's not going in taxes. We know this. And so instead what should be happening is, rather than allowing this kind of contractual trick of self-employment status, is they should be considered as workers, as worker status, which means you still retain the flexibility. You're not a full employee, you still retain the flexibility to work when you want to, but you have rights to minimum wage, sick pay, holiday pay, the kind of employers' responsibilities that trade unions and workers have fought for hundreds of years, and those rights should be extended to Deliveroo workers as workers. So I think the implications of the gig economy or the emergence of these kind of platforms is it provides a new way for capital and for managers to organise work. Now I think this is important because if we look at call centres introduced a way of organising work that entailed a lot of technology, the use of electronic surveillance, of monitoring, of high pressure environment. Now at first this was just involved in call centres. We saw these spread throughout the call centre sectors and be used and kind of perfected there. Now those lessons then get learned elsewhere, and we now find monitoring across different sectors of the economy, technological surveillance being used increasingly, whether it's from the NHS to across different private sector, education systems. And I think the same is going to happen with Deliveroo and Uber, as the kind of lessons that are learned here about how to fracture a workforce, to spread them out, to make it harder for them to organise, to divest from the needs to pay minimum wage, sick pay, holiday pay, is this won't stay with logistics and delivery. If this is proven to be a successful model, it will be rolled out in more and more workplaces. And you can see, from its most dystopian you could see all work being fractured in this way. And that's why it's incredibly important, whether you work for one of these companies or not, is to get involved in these organising campaigns. Because whether or not Deliveroo or Uber succeed in creating this kind of model, the effect will be felt not only within those companies but across the whole of society.